Welcome back to Leadership Blueprints, everybody. We are continuing our November DoD to AEC, that's Department of Defense, to Architect, Engineering, Construction Industry, where we talk through the transition and the leadership lessons learned that we can apply from active duty to the built environment. And in particular, of value, we talk through the transition and the decision making of when it's time to hang up the uniform, how people think through that. So if you are somebody that is leaving active duty, we hope you get something out of today's episode. Excited to welcome my buddy and West Point 2004 classmate for Country and Core, Craig Bryant, to the show. Craig, what's happening?
Thanks. Yeah, great to be here. And I told you beforehand, but first time I've ever done one of these, so hopefully it's not a crash and burn. Let's see how it goes.
You'll be just fine. Rookies are my specialty.
Well, that's good to know.
All right, Craig, we start every show letting people understand the role that you currently are. I mean, I hit on that. You came off active duty, and we'll get into that and the career transition. But the give you your 30 seconds to give the elevator pitch of who you are today with that
Sure.
big beard you got going on.
Yeah, my wife likes it. Sure. So yeah, I'm the USACE Market Leader for a firm called Mead Hunt. We are a full service AE firm. We work in a lot of different markets around the world, but my focus, or really around the country, my focus is purely on the Corps of Engineers. The last about 18 months or so, I've been focused purely on the vertical portfolio. And here in about 2-3 months, I will pick up both the vertical and the civil works portfolio. And I'm a business development guy, pure seller. And for those who are out there, there's a lot of different models. This is done under seller doer and things of that nature. My job is to be out in front of understanding what opportunities will exist for Mead Hunt to pursue in the USACE environment, from IDIQs and various just individual projects as the case may be. And then also a lot of partnership, which I hope we get to talk about that, because one of the things I've learned over the last 18 months of doing this or so, now I guess roughly 18, the partnerships that we have here in the kind of the federal FedCon AEC space are much different than the partnerships that are out there in other parts of the AEC space, and they function a little bit differently. And something that's really important to understand, and actually kind of plays into a little bit of what I hope we get into as we talk about transition and how I found my new home here at Mead Hunt, and was able to kind of quickly get up to speed, or maybe I'm not up to speed yet. We'll find out here, I guess. But so yeah, that'd be good.
Let's go right into it, because I talk about leadership, but I find myself, we come off active duty, and whether you're a platoon leader leading 30 people, or a battalion commander leading 1,000 people, or brigade commander leading 3,000 people, you come into the private sector and all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're going to be a BD asset, and you're a strategic player, and you're still a leader, but you don't have a ton of direct reports, and you're not the CEO of this huge organization. But in many ways, business development and leading teams, leading partnerships, and leading clients towards decisions, to me, is the highest leverage leadership that we have. So why don't you dig into how leadership is applying to that role, and maybe we get right into what led you to choosing a business development type role, and the culture at Fort Meade that attracted you there.
Yeah, sure. So the any organization, which a team is an organization, it doesn't matter how big or small that team is, it's an organization, needs someone who's pointing. I learned this, we learned it at West Point, God, 25 years ago now. It's scary to say that. It makes me feel older than I really am, I reckon. But it needs someone who's pointing the team, getting them organized in the right direction. How many times in the Army, you said, hey, we're all going to get across the finish line. Who knows how big the box we get across the finish line will be, because you got, your stragglers and things like that, but we're all going to get across the finish line. And it's kind of the same thing that I found here. Um, you know, my goal or my job as, the USACE Market Leader A lot of times I'm what's called the proposal manager. Whenever you go into a proposal mode, you've got different folks who have different seats on the bus. As far as the proposal coordinator who's actually, putting together the proposal, you've got other folks who are sorting through what's the team going to look like, where the project's going to look like, and things of that nature. And my job is to really shepherd that through the whole process and make sure we get from, pre-positioning, right, which can be 6 months to a year ahead of an opportunity, through the actual advertisement, through the production of our statement of qualifications. And other people pop in and out of that, but I'm the one guy who shepherds and feeds and cares for that particular proposal all the way across, right? And so that means I'm coordinating assets from different parts of the company. Sometimes it means I'm coordinating with the teaming partners, right? And a lot of times it's with those teaming partners, that's where some of the most difficult leadership lessons come in, or most difficult leadership challenges, because you're blending two different companies. And one of the things that you learn as you go through this transition process, and then you kind of get out here into the industry, is every company is its own individual culture. And none of them are bad. At least that would be how I would say it. Everybody fits into a culture where they're happy, right? And so that's why I say there's not really bad cultures at any firm, but they are just inherently different. And that's why there's different firms. We don't all just work for the same company, right? And so when you hit those friction points between the two cultures, when you hit those friction points between the two processes, some companies have different business processes. When you find those friction points, that's where the leaders have to come in. And how do we get past that friction point? How do we make these two teams work together? How do we find the best way to the most successful outcome that we can do? And just yesterday, I was on the phone with one of the managers here at Mead Hunt. She called me about one of her employees and said, "Hey, I've heard there's some challenges going on right now with a particular proposal." And I didn't even know that I was doing it. And I was talking with her, and I said to her, I said, "Hey, when you talk to your employee, just from a guy who used to do this for, 20 years as a leader, here's some thoughts of how I might approach it." It wasn't even intentional. I don't even know where it came from. Like you said, I don't have direct reports anymore, but as I work with all of my folks and my team, I try to always approach it from the same standpoint of, respect and care as a leader that I did, when I was, in the district or in a battalion or whatever it was, across my Army career there. And I think sometimes we just fall back to what's normal, and fall back to what we're used to. And I didn't even realize I said it. And then I was like, oh my God, I actually just said that. I felt, very boomerish for a moment after having said it. And, but yeah, it's just taking it's very small unit, the different, taking the small unit leadership strategies that you might have used as a platoon leader or a company commander, and applying them to these, like you again said, these massive opportunities, $500 million, MATOCs and things like that. And it's just so crazy how much it transitions. And one of the other things that I learned, going through the process, we get so much more exposure to that leadership in the Army so much earlier on. I mean, I was really old when we graduated from West Point, right? I was, 24, right? And here they, give me a platoon of 30 people. And then you kind of get to the, you become a company commander in your late 20s, 30s. You've got 130 or whatever the number might be there, right? And then you come to industry and all of a sudden you realize, these organizations are smaller, but the folks, in order to get into those places, to lead them, 25, 30 years before they may have, an organization the size of a company, company, right? And so your scale of thought changes a little bit in that regard. But I think if you just stick to the good principles of, basic leadership and fair treatment of people, that's really what's important. And again, also just making sure people are valued. We won a contract. It was actually my first. And the first thing I did was I picked up the phone and I called the proposal coordinator and I just said, "Hey, thanks." And she didn't even know why I was calling her. And I mistakenly assumed that she had gotten the news that we had won the contract. And, so I just called her, and literally the first thing I said to her was just, "Hey, thanks, appreciate it." And she said, "What for?" And I said, "We won that contract." And she said, "You're one of the few people who's ever actually just picked up the phone and called and said thanks for it. And I said, well, I mean, to me, it seemed like the right thing to do. It seemed like kind of basics of leadership and just making sure people understand that they're valued. That's
So I want to jump into
yeah,
how you do that when they are not your direct reports. We are so used to an organizational hierarchy, and these are my people, and these are you're grabbing senior SMEs to help with a proposal. You're grabbing marketing assets. You're coordinating all these assets that are not directly reporting to you, and probably in a semi
matrix organization. Yeah.
matrix organization. What are some lessons you've learned? It sounds like, lesson number one, treat people with the right level of respect, and use simple things like please and thank you. But what
Yeah.
else have you learned in organizations where people are constantly being stretched for their time, and in many ways being judged for how they're deploying their time, right? Utilization and whatnot. Talk
Yeah.
to us about that, and then we'll get into some of your transition lessons.
Yeah. I think, well, the first thing is you just have to be deliberate with it. You sit down and uh, I never start a proposal process with I'm going to thank this person publicly in this manner.
Yep.
I'm going to, not thank this person over here. I think you just have to be deliberate with understanding where along the way it's appropriate, and really being specific with it, because the specific part is so important for folks to understand that your gratitude is genuine. Anyone can pick up the phone and say thank you after a contract win, right? Like, I'm not bragging about that. It was just kind of a funny experience. Um, but on the other hand, we've had project pursuits that we've lost where I've had marketing coordinators or, research folks do amazing work. And it's making sure you tell their boss, right? Like, sometimes it's better than telling them, you in a
Yeah.
public manner tell their boss, hey, this person did an outstanding job with this particular thing, and whatever it was. So it's very specific. So they understand that you recognized that, folks just want to be seen. They want to be appreciated for what they do. I've generally found, some people kind of think like the carrot and stick stuff. Oh, you pay them more, you give them a bonus or whatever. I would love to have the authority to do that. I don't. Probably a good thing is I would probably have a habit to spend like a drunk sailor. But just having the intentionality of recognizing that sometimes just goes a lot further, and it builds goodwill. And we had an issue recently between us and a teaming partner where we've each sort of mutually let each other down at different times, and so then having that strategic conversation with those leaders on the other side of it to say, hey, we recognize this is where we kind of misstepped, and they said, hey, we recognize where we misstepped, and then you let it go.
Yeah.
We're not going to worry about it anymore. We're going to focus on whatever the next thing is. I think that's really important. But yeah, it has been interesting to find the ways to directly lead, because you're right, we come from the military. We're so used to having that organizational structure, and I've just found it's just, at the end of the day, it's very important just to be intentional with your gratitude, intentional with your respect. And what's that old thing about, praise in public, discipline in private?
Yeah.
Um, really, I mean, I've never had to discipline anybody in this role. I hope never. Yeah, I do plenty of that with my kids. That's a different story. Failures as a father, I guess, but
It's where our best leadership lessons are
that's
actually
right.
learned.
It actually really kind of is. Just that you see the worst you see the worst and the best of yourself and your kids, and then you learn where you messed it up. But just so much of it just goes back to those fundamentals of leadership that are kind of ground into us early on about how to do that. Yeah.
Talk to me. I want to get into your career path in the military just to give people a little flavor, because you had a great mix of operational combat stuff and USACE stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so why don't we go there, and then we'll talk about what led you, or what attracted you, or what was the decision making process coming off active duty for your first job.
Sure. Yeah.
So we
So,
both graduated in 04. We were at OBC together, and then from there, where does Craig Bryant's career take
yeah,
him?
where do I go? So I go to Fort Polk, Louisiana. And I was a platoon leader and a company XO and a battalion staff officer. Just did the standard lieutenant and young captain things. Went to Iraq for a tour, in 2005, 2006, I guess it was. Left there on transition leave between my first assignment and the career course. I wind up meeting what is now my wife, or who is now my wife. She is now my wife. I'm not sure how that's supposed to be said, but wind up meeting her at home in Virginia on leave. And so then I go to the career course. We were at the career course together too, weren't we?
We were, yeah.
Yeah. I knew Josh Wilson was there, and
We had a great squad there.
to be honest, so much of our OBC class transitioned to the career course together. And so I was trying to put together like who was or wasn't there as I was trying to thinking through getting prepped for this. And so they're at the career course, and there were some situations with Megan's education and some student loan repayments and stuff like that. And so I needed to get back to Virginia, or back to the East Coast. Went to Fort Bragg. Did company command there in the 82nd and some staff time. And I was really actually sort of ready to leave the Army at about 8 years. I didn't have a lot of goals for the Army when I came in the Army initially. I mean, what do we know and looking back now, I know what I didn't know, right? I kind of wanted to be a platoon leader. The war was going on at the time. So I wanted to, do my part in that. And everybody, I'm sure you remember this, everybody always said, don't leave the Army until you've been a company commander, right?
Yep.
All that kind of stuff. And so I sort of wanted to do that. And Megan was pregnant at the time. We were there living in Fayetteville, and which is close to home for both of us. And I could kind of decided that I was sort of done with the Army, and the Army might have been sort of done with me. And next thing you know, some weird twists of fate, the Army came in and said, hey, you can go to graduate school if you want to. And then on the backside of that, you'll have to, go work for the Corps of Engineers. And I said, that sounds like a good opportunity, and worst comes to worst, I come out of it with a master's degree and a little bit of time in the Corps of Engineers. And if I decide to move on after that, I decide to move on after that, and I'll be a little bit better positioned. So I went to Virginia Tech, did my master's in civil engineering there. And then first kind of curveball from the Army was got selected to go to CGSC. So went directly from grad school to CGSC. And then coming out of that, went to the Corps there in Baltimore, worked for, Ed Chamberlain, one of your previous podcasters. Ed and I have a lot of background together, actually, kind of oddly enough. My master's thesis advisor was on his board for his PhD at Virginia Tech. And then funnily enough, his wife and my wife went to the same high school, about 10 years apart. But so a lot of uniqueness there that, he and I share some background and wind up working for him in Baltimore. Also did a little tour through headquarters USACE as an aide for one of the DCGs up there.
Which aide?
I was John Peabody's XO for kind of the tail end of his career there for a couple of months. And then worked in the RSFO there in Baltimore. I think you and I connected a little bit back then.
Yeah.
Dale Daniel, who I worked with there in the RSFO back then. Did that job for a little while, and then went back to tactical world back at Fort Hood, which was a little interesting, being a guy who'd, sort of grown up around that Fort Bragg culture. And next thing you know,
light fighter in a heavy town.
Wind up at Fort Hood, and my first brigade commander there talking about the tanks and the Bradleys, and I sort of jokingly looked at him and said, "Which one's which?" And he looked over and I've got the 82nd patch on the right arm and the senior parachutist wings. He's like, "Oh yeah, you're one of those." And
but talk about cultures.
Yeah, very different. And that was great though. Went to Korea while I was there, and then came home. Then went to Poland, which was great. And then came time to find that post KD job, and I said, "Hey, I want to go back to the Corps." It was a good experience and good opportunity to just see something a little bit different. As luck would have it, we wound up in Tulsa. It was something we had never heard of. To be honest, here we are. They called me and said, you're our first choice. And I said, I don't even know who you guys are. And they said, what do you know about Tulsa? I said, it's in Oklahoma, and that's north of Texas, and that's about the extent of it. So of course I'm in Poland while this is happening. And so we got there, and I kind of gave myself a 50-50 shot. This guy gets to the transition thing, right? I kind of given myself a 50-50 shot at making, battalion command. And I didn't really necessarily know what I would do if I didn't. Wound up not making it on the first look. And so the wife and I kind of chatted a little bit, and I said, what do we want to do? And the way the career paths work, I was kind of at a point where I maybe could have stayed in Tulsa the whole time and just sort of wrote it out to retirement there. Or, we could ask the Army to move us. And we decided to wait a year before we figured out what to do. And my wife's actually the one who said to me, I think I want to stay here in Tulsa. So then I had to kind of convince the Army to let me stay a little bit of extra time. But that was not really that difficult. And so, when I didn't make the command list, it was kind of one of those, okay, that's a tough cut. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't take it as like a personal shot or anything like that. I was disappointed, obviously, that natural competitiveness of West Pointers, you're disappointed when you don't succeed. But I just had to look at it as, okay, there's something else out there for me, and made the decision then to sort of transition. And that started a whole different process of, researching what types of jobs do I want to do? Where do I want to do them? Who do I want to work for? And I think if there's one thing I could say to those who might be watching this right now about their transition, if you're watching it and you're not thinking about your transition, start thinking about it, because it's just, I think so many of us in the Army were so focused on the mission. And I was even bad about this. I ignored some of the transition stuff, there at the end, just because, hey, I want to, carry the ruck all the way until that, whatever that last day is on the calendar that you're going to be before the transition leave starts, right? I'm here until I'm here, kind of thing. Just so much of the stuff that I just didn't know to even think through. And then you're starting to work through all the decision-making process and stuff like that. And I didn't even know what I wanted to do. I didn't know anything about the industry side, and I actually have a mentor. He interestingly enough, he's with Mead Hunt, kind of funny, but he's a mentor there in Tulsa. And I went out to Mead Hunt when I realized I was going to retire. I said, okay, I'm going to retire. I need to find a job. And I went out to Mead Hunt's website and found they had a project manager job advertised at the time. And I want to say they had like 6 or 7 things that they wanted the candidate to have, different experience types. And I looked at it and I figured I could write a resume that spoke to 4 or 5 of them, and I could, get by on the college trial on the other 2. And so I just sent it over. I said, it's very clear, because all the rules about negotiations and stuff like that. And it was very clear, and said, hey, it's not this job. It's not right now. I'm just trying to learn what I need to be targeting for my transition. Is this a good job that I should be looking for? And the reason I picked Mead Hunt and that person in that job was he knew me, he knew the job, and he knew what I'd done in the Army, and he could give me that kind of good insight, right?
Yeah.
He writes back and he says, no, you should look at this job. And he sent me a job for a business development opportunity that they had posted at the time. I read it and I don't even know, I don't understand any of the words, I can't spell these words. What are you talking about? So I sent him a note back and I said, hey, I don't understand. What am I missing? And he started just kind of explain what business development folks do here in the federal world, how that more lines up with what, military officers do from a perspective of, developing strategy, developing plans, things of that nature. And so then I started researching things about all the different models of, the seller doer model, the pure business development guys, and just learning more and more about that. Fortunately, I'd gotten involved with SAME. That was kind of an odd side quest that got started down there at Fort Hood.
Oh yeah.
It sort of grew. Yeah. It started off when I was at Leavenworth for CGSC. The Kansas City Post had paid for a bunch of us to take the PE prep course Um, and I can tell you right now today, if I hadn't attended that PE prep course, I never would have passed that exam. And so when I got to Fort Hood, I had a couple of lieutenants come in. They said, "Hey, sir, you're a PE. That's pretty rare. We want to be PEs. How'd you do it?" And I said, "Well, I took this prep course that this SAME organization paid for." And so I start trying to make some phone calls where the SAME people are around Fort Hood and, just link these guys up and sort of outsource the problem. Right. And it quickly wound up that I got invited to a lunch, and next thing you know, I'm the Fort Hood post president. I was like, wait a minute, how'd this happen? And that just sort of grew into some things, wound up being, an elected director on the national board and stuff like that. And so that gave me a lot of exposure to the ability to talk to different people from different firms, learn different things about different firms, and talk to people who had transitioned already and find out, hey, what do I need to know? What do I need to be asking? Tell me what I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Is that's the most dangerous part, are the things that you don't know. And so through that, just had built a huge network, and then wound up, when the time came, you sort of, you get your retirement orders and you turn on the little thing on LinkedIn that says, open to work, or what I think that's what it says,
Yeah.
or opened a new job or something like that. And from there, just started, working through the process of folks reaching out to me with opportunities, me finding opportunities that were out there. And, working through this whole, I kind of recently, because I've been helping some guys through it, sort of looked back a little bit at, what do I wish I had known?
Yeah.
In? I had sort of decided to take a little bit of a different tactic, probably than some people did. I decided to try to build a profile of the type of company that I would want to work for. And then I would go out and market myself to those types of companies. And so I went through, fortunately, Leigh Fontefova, I hope I said his name properly. I'm never really great at names, but he posted on LinkedIn when they changed the rules to where you could apply for retirement 2 years before you were able to retire. And I saw that on Leigh's post and I was like, oh, wait a minute, holy cow. And so, you put your retirement paperwork in and you start to kind of work through some of these things about what do I need to know. And I just sort of didn't know. But that gave me time to
Yeah.
start talking to people. And I quickly figured out if you target a job, if you target a type, that's really tough. You start getting these really narrow pathways, and I wanted a broader pathway. And so I said, I don't know what I want to do because I've never been in industry.
Yep.
I had some ideas of what I didn't want to do, which I thought were important, things that you just don't want to do, don't do them, right? You have the option to have the choice now. And so I said, maybe I just want to find out who I want to work for. And so I spent, again, I had 2 years of foreknowledge here. I spent about the first year of that talking to different people. Hey, how do you like your job? How do you like your firm? What is it one thing I learned is nobody's ever going to tell you their firm has a bad culture. And I sort of made that joke earlier. Companies don't have bad cultures, otherwise we'd all work. But no one who's working at a firm is going to tell you, this place is a Titanic and it's fixing to sink. I'm sure there's someone out there who will, but it's pretty rare. And so just trying to identify what were the things that made people like those things, and started doing, Venn diagrams in my mind of the things that were popping out being important, that drove toward culture and things of that nature, and started building the profile of the type of company that I would want to work for. And then once that was done, really just sort of actively, I never said no to anybody who wanted to talk about an opportunity. That's the first thing that may be honest, the first, I probably already said the first thing I would tell people, but, something that I think would be really important for folks transitioning is don't take the phone call. Always take the phone call, always take at least the first conversation, maybe even the second conversation. You just never know what's out there, right?
You were doing business development before you knew what business development was.
Yeah, probably, right. And then maybe that's why it's kind of worked out a little bit. But So talked to a lot of folks and learned the methods, and then um, I had this sort of parameters of the types of companies, and my kind of drivers were size. I knew I didn't want to go work at an AECom or a Jacobs. They're great firms. I don't say that to, there's a lot of folks there doing great things. It's just
Yeah.
they're massive and you can get lost in them,
Yep.
and I really didn't want to go to a small business either. I mean, you and I could probably, go to a bar and close the place down and dry it out, talking about all the challenges and stresses of being in a small business environment, and I was like, hey, this is my second career. I
Yeah.
let me manage the amount of stress I'm signing up for, right? Was kind of the way I would say it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted to be in that sort of middle range, where I'm at. I found, ownership structure was really important in driving culture. So for me, I figured out that I wanted to be at an employee-owned firm. And then I also figured out, hey, I don't want to be at a firm that's never done USACE work before. I knew I wanted to stay tied at the core. I love the civil works mission. That's why it's kind of funny that I've spent the last 18 months focused on the milk
Doing
hunt side.
vertical.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit funny there, but I love the civil works mission. I think it's really the strategic value that the core provides to the nation. And so uh, those were the things that I was looking for. So I went looking for firms that met that. And then, I think the challenging thing is you've got to be ready for firms to tell you, hey, we just don't have an opportunity for you right now.
Yeah.
That's not personal. It's just a reality of business. Um, and so went through all that, lots of different interviews with different firms. Um, the other challenge that I had was I realized that probably like the third or fourth conversation with different firms, I realized that everybody that I was talking to was a friend. Was someone I'd served with along the way, or was a friend of the friend who they'd introduced me. And I realized, and I said, one of my win themes to bring something that I never heard of in the Army, a win theme. I've learned it now, on this side of it. So retrospectively, one of my win themes was I don't want to lose any friends over picking a home.
Yeah.
Um, because ultimately, just like some firms are going to tell you no, you can only say yes to one firm, right? And
Totally.
so, you're going to have to at some point look at a friend and tell him no. And I didn't want that to cost me friendships and relationships that I'd built over a long, long time. And so that's, again, just the importance of being respectful. And then I get here and I realized why it was even more important. I really got to like the true hard interviews, hard written offer stage with about four firms. And uh, Mead Hunt uh, gave me an offer, and I had a couple others, and I, was just deciding and discerning and figuring out what to do, and ultimately, made the decision Mead Hunt was the right place to be. And I get to my first day at Mead Hunt, and I realize Mead Hunt's in joint ventures with two of those other firms, right?
Yeah.
And so, had I been,
We
some
call
sort
that co-opetition.
yeah, exactly. But the flip side of that too is, I would say that because of the way I approached that process of finding a home, you know, I already had those relationships built, and those folks were just as excited for me to land at Mead and Hunt as I was. At least they've said that. Maybe they're lying. I don't know, but they've at least told me they're excited for me to be where I'm at, which is appreciative. So that's one of those, looking back, I don't know that I would have realized that going into the process, how important that would be. It's not always going to be that way. That might be a unique
Yeah.
situation for me, and that's probably because I targeted companies that are a lot like Mead and Hunt, and so we tend to team with companies that are a lot like us, and so that may have
Right.
been a factor of that. But I just look back and I'm like, I'm really glad I approached things the way I did, because I could have made my life now a lot more difficult if I'd made some really poor decisions, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's such an important lesson. I mean, in business development, in the transition process, relationships are so valuable, and they drive, and you want to do work and you want to work with people that you like, trust and respect, and vice versa. They like, trust and respect you. So I think it's a great, I think it's a great point. Any any books or resources that you used as you were like trying to figure out, hey, how the hell do I even get started on thinking through this?
Yeah, so this is the big joke about Craig Bryant and leadership is that I'm not a very good reader. I'm not. I'm terrible at it. Um, I did the SAME LDP program towards the end of my majors time. Right towards the end of it, I wish I'd done it 5 years before. I learned a lot in that. One of the weird ones, and this is, okay, boomer, we'll pull it up here, I guess. How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Great one.
It's out there. It's kind of this generic leadership book that people have just thrown around for years. But one of the things that kind of it crystallized in my mind that helped me was never approach a situation focused on yourself. Approach a situation focused on the best outcome of the situation, and understand that the best way to work with someone else is to make sure that they understand that you're taking their concerns into heart. And if I could boil the theme of how to win
It's such a
people down into something, that would be it.
So did the SAME LDP have you read that?
They did. It was kind of funny. They also had us read Good to Great, which is a pretty funny story amongst folks who were involved with that. With me, I had hated the book Good to Great. I avoided it forever. I had a battalion commander. This was way before hashtagging was a thing. Back when you and I were captains, I don't even know if Twitter was invented yet. And his tagline was Good to Great. He'd say something to us in a command and staff meeting. He'd be like, Good to Great. And it's like, I was not a particularly huge fan of this individual. And I decided I had to go look up what it was, found out it's a book. And I decided then and there that if that book made that man, I was never going to read that book because I did not want to turn into that man. And so I get to the LDP program, and SAME makes me read it. And about 2 chapters in, I realized that either A, that guy had never actually read the book. He just heard the tagline and thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Or B,
he read it, but didn't synthesize.
Read it, and the way he and I approached it was completely different because my takeaways were completely different. So that's kind of that. I would say one of the big resources, if you're wanting to get into the AEC, and this is not a paid endorsement, but the career transition workshop that SAME does, you can condense. So a lot of that, like researching of companies and stuff, I was doing that, ad hoc along the way, at different things. If you want to condense into that and get to be able to do that in just a couple of days, that transition workshop will help you do that. I will just give the disclaimer: don't go to it thinking you're going to leave with a job. I think some folks go there thinking they're going to walk out with job offers in hand, and I don't think that's realistic. You'll walk out with opportunities and relationships that you need to continue to nurture. But
greater awareness of the industry and the types of opportunities that are available.
Yeah.
So I just want to make a quick note here. Not everybody, I think most people listening know what SAME is, Society of American Military Engineers. Huge organization supporting really the gap between the civil commercial AE industry, including security and defense, not just architect, engineering, construction, because resiliency has become such a huge part of the mission there in the military. So small business conference next or this month, this is airing in November, down in Phoenix, Arizona. Talk to us about how you got into the leadership development program, because I've heard about it. I've heard it's been an awesome program for both military and civilian, federal civilian employees, as well as private sector.
Yeah, I was actually in the first class. Again, I wind up in the thing down there at Fort Hood, going from trying to find somebody to solve a problem to being a post president in space of about 72 hours. And it's a little longer than that, but not much. And that's when they decided to do it. And there's a guy, Buddy Barnes. He won't watch this, but I'll put his name in there. And I'm sure folks who are around the AEC, when I say that, they'll know who he
Yeah,
is.
well-known name.
Yeah, yeah. So Buddy Barnes was the national president-elect at the time. And he called me and said, "Hey, I want you to apply to this thing." They'd never done it before. It was the first round of it. He said, "Apply to this thing. Let's just see what shakes out." And so I did. I probably had the easiest path into it, right? Because first class, they don't know what they're looking for. And, I've got this guy that's the president elect, sort of pushing my application through. I think if I spent 20 minutes on the application, I'd be shocked. It just was kind of one of those things.
Yep.
And I was just as shocked when they picked me, and then I learned a little bit later about how that process worked, and I wasn't quite that surprised. But again, that's understanding the aftermath, not necessarily understanding on the front side. But so now, if you want to do it, it's a much more competitive. I've been a part of now. So I did the LDP, then I went back and I helped facilitate the LDP for a couple of years. That ironically ran the book program because the big joke was Craig doesn't like to read, and let's make the guy who doesn't like to read, let's make him run the book program. It was kind of the sort of life's great ironies, and helped out with that for a couple of years. Moved on from doing that onto some other things. But if you're looking to do it now, the most important person to talk to is your RVP. So SAME, the way they're organized, regional vice presidents, the regional vice presidents have a lot of impact on how those leader development candidates are selected, and just talk to them about what they're looking for. But I would also say don't be discouraged either. It's one of those. I got a lot of humbling lessons out of the Army all along the way. From I don't know that I ever applied for a job that I actually successfully got. So I had a lot of humbling. I didn't even get into West Point the first time. I had to go to Virginia Tech for a year before I got to West Point. So I guess the Army started humbling me early on. But there's a lot of other leader development programs that are associated with SAME now. A lot of the regions are starting their own programs. Some posts are starting their own programs. Because the national program, they have 20 participants a year. A couple of years ago, I knew what the applicant versus accepted numbers were. I'd be lying if I told them to you now, and I don't want to do that to you. So, but what that's
tremendous resource, though. It sounds like.
yeah.
What does the program look like? Talk us through. Is it 1 year?
Yeah, it's a
In
year.
addition to the books, and
Yep.
what's that look like?
Yeah, it's molded. It's morphed and molded a couple of times. They've tried to adjust it to keep it relevant. But it's a year-long program. They take everybody to the Joint Engineer Training Conference. Is the front side of it, and you spend 2 or 3 days. Don't get me. And nobody come back and tell me it was 2, but it was actually 3 or the other way around. I don't really remember. But you spend 2 or 3 days with a professional leadership consultant that they bring in. They go through some of the different, like the Myers-Briggs and the DISC. It used to be organized, and I've been a little bit dissociated from it now for a little while, so I could be dated here, but it was kind of organized into modules of knowing yourself, knowing your team, and knowing the future. So it's kind of that know yourself period, or some of those talent inventories that are out there now, different ones, right? And then the knowing your team is kind of learning some of those small leadership 101 type things. I sort of make the joke, it's like troop leading procedures with different words, because there's no worries about making sure their guns are ready, kind of thing. And then knowing the future is a little bit of, that's the part that, to be honest, I wish I'd gotten a little bit more out of it, because I could definitely be leveraging it now in this role, from like the business acumen sense, and understanding a little bit of that, because that's definitely a delta that we come out of the military with. And then the books kind of float on top of that. And the books really serve less to make you an expert on Good to Great or any of the other books. The point of the books is just to use those vignettes to start discussions about leadership and get your fellow classmates talking. And then there are a couple throughout the year. There's it's all virtual other than the JETC attendance. Throughout the year, there's a couple of webinar type things where they bring in strategic leaders, both from the military and from private industry, and then some who are military who went to private industry, just to talk through different leadership lessons that are out there. Um, so that, and then probably the most impactful thing is they have you do what's called a utilization project. Usually it's done in teams. A couple of folks will get together and come up with a project that it's sort of like, I think maybe those who are Eagle Scouts understand, the old, Eagle Scout project where, it doesn't matter if you build 2 benches or 4 benches. What matters is, did you lead people to get the benches built, right?
Right.
Same kind of concept here. They're looking for how you can show your strategic leadership and thought with the project that you've come up with, and then how you kind of get it across the line. Not necessarily as much leading people, because they don't have the people to give you, but
Totally.
you know,
Conceptual.
yeah, and some of those have gone on to be some really massive things. Mine wasn't. Mine was basically how to set up a new community of interest. That's because 3 months after I started the program, the Army said, "Hey, you need to go to Poland." And so, trying to be a battalion XO in Poland while doing this, was a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I definitely recommend it. But if you apply, you don't get selected, there's other resources out there. Or apply again. And I've seen, I think at one point they wanted to target it to young professionals, but I don't think that's really held through and who's been selected
Yeah.
along the way. I think, I'm going to date myself here. I was like 6 months away from not being a young professional, and when I did it, and so I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Awesome. All right. You don't love books. Any favorite podcasts?
Favorite podcasts. Well, let me think. I was listening to one for a long time called the Service Academy Business Mastermind. I don't know if you've heard of it or not.
Yeah, I have.
Just to me, and we talked about this a little bit early on there before we got on the recording, about where all of our classmates are, those who are in Congress and those who are
Yeah.
in
Many
great
different paths out there to
yeah.
success.
And so I'd sort of have this affinity for fellow Service Academy grads, whether they're from, there is only one military academy, we'll be clear, but, there's other service academies out there. Just hearing how folks go from that and go out into all these different avenues, all these different, ways of being successful, ways of continuing to be leaders. I go back to that. I think
Lifetime of selfless service to the nation. I talk about it all the time. Like when we take
yeah.
the uniform off, we can still make an impact in our communities. And
Yeah, so that's one. I say I don't like books. I do have a Kindle, and I do my best to read. Lately, I've been reading a lot of books on the history of money, interestingly enough. And not like how to get rich, but just like the actual history of how
policy
monetary
and
systems and
yeah,
policy and all that. I don't know what's gotten me onto that kick lately. Whatever the Kindle advertising algorithm is that's fed those to me. But
that's right.
That's been kind of the latest thing that I've
Cool.
been. But
Any favorite quotes?
oh wow. Who you had to ask? That's a. There's so many of them out there, right? Like, how many have I seen on people's email taglines along the way? Um, you know, uh, gosh.
I can give you a pass.
I mean, this is going to sound really, really cheesy. The Nike tagline, is it still "just do it"? I don't know. That's how
It is in my mind.
Yeah, right.
If it's not, their marketing team has failed them.
That's right. And Michael Jordan will always be the guy that I
That's right.
associate it to.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
If I could be like Mike.
Exactly, right. Yeah, I think that one's probably out there. A lot of people get analysis paralysis and they never try anything. So that concept or that idea of always looking forward with action and looking forward to find something that it sounds kind of banal and stupid coming out, but at the same time, it
No,
sounds.
I don't think so at all. I agree 100% with it.
So,
And funny enough, I don't think we've ever talked about this, but I contemplated while at West Point getting the Nike swoosh tattoo on my foot. A girl I knew had gotten it like as if her foot was a sneaker, and because of the "Just Do It" slogan, I had an affinity for Nike.
well,
For
as
a
a
long
swimmer,
time.
you just wanted the guys behind you to see that, right? Was that what it was?
um, All right, last rapid fire question, and the floor is yours. If you could have dinner with 3 people, dead or alive, who would they be?
Oh, holy cow. Um, well, the first would be my great grandmother because she'd have to cook it. Um, that would be the first. So I guess that's an easy one.
What would you cook?
Fried chicken, green beans, biscuits, mashed potatoes, sweet tea. I mean, all the stuff that, my great grandparents owned a farm, all the stuff that, farm people cook, right? Like that
Love
would,
it.
so that's the easiest. She's the dead. Um, I'll go with a category of people. I won't go with a specific person.
All
I'd
right.
love to have dinner with a president. Um, just I'm not a real politically motivated person, but just think of the challenge. I spent a time as an aide, and the first thing I saw was just the very wide right and left limits that my boss had, and it was like, wow, like how difficult what's going on in his brain. So I would love to have dinner
Mm-hmm.
with a president, um, just to know like hear them talk about the challenges that they
Yeah.
face, you know. Um, I would have to go with, I'm going to give a very specific name and I'll tell you why. Charlie Duke. I don't know if you know who Charlie Duke is or not. I'll tell
I
everybody who he
don't.
is. He may be dead and he may be alive. I don't know. He was not dead about 9 years ago. And
Okay.
so he was was part of the last mission to the moon.
Hmm.
And I have a little bit of a personal connection with him. He's actually my parents' best friend's neighbor. And so I was down there at my parents' friend's house and playing with my kid in the yard. And this very nice old man in an old square body 70 Chevy drives out of the driveway next door. And my dad's buddy says, "Yeah, that's our astronaut neighbor." And I thought he kind of meant like, you know,
He's
like a
out there.
that kind of guy. And I just sort of laughed it off. And he goes, "No, no, no, it's Charlie Duke. He's one of the 12 men who walked on the moon." And I'm like, wait a minute, you've got the guy who walked on the moon living next door. Um, and so he was also, I believe, and I've never asked him this, but I think the story is that he was also the guy on the radio for Houston, we have a problem. He was the one
Hmm.
who actually received that call when Apollo 13 had that. So, again, just hearing his stories about, that experience, and he owned a brewery. I mean, like, who doesn't want to have dinner with a guy who owned he worked
Sounds like an awesome
or,
eclectic
or
guy.
worked for Budweiser or something like that after he left the army. He had like a distributorship or something, or after he left the NASA, he had like a distributorship or something like that. So yeah, that would be the three.
All right. I love it. Close us out. Any parting wisdom, any parting thoughts, any self advertisement for the Mead and Hunt team? What the floor is yours.
Somebody's watching this and a USACE contract officer, don't tell your lawyers that you watched it. Just give me a call. Yeah, just if the target is for the folks who are transitioning, I would just say, hey, if you're in the military now, one of the things you need to remember, there's only two ways out. Whether you do 5 years and transition out kind of like some folks did, or you do 20 like I did, or you do 30 like some folks do. The only other way out of it is, in a box. And I don't think any of us want to do that. So start thinking about what the next thing is now. Start figuring out what you want your life to be. And don't be afraid to ask questions. It is, I didn't ask enough. Right. And it's not that I'm not unhappy it's not that I'm not happy where I am. I'm very happy where I am. It's just so many things as I've gone back to the process of talking to other people and collecting my thoughts, I realized I didn't think to ask. And the last one is don't be scared of it. I think a lot of folks, the reason they do that, keeping it at arm's length, is because they're scared of it. It'll be fine. And
Embrace it. Yeah,
yeah,
embrace the change. And one of
yeah.
the reasons we do this, everybody, is to be of help. Oh man. Hold on. Need water. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can connect with Craig on LinkedIn and any number of I haven't met a veteran that transitioned that isn't willing to help anybody else that's going through the process. So look us up on LinkedIn and Craig, I got to thank you for your time. Best of
Yeah,
luck with your role at Mead and Hunt
appreciate
and
it.
beat Navy.
Yes, please.